Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. One way to ensure we are living, and I mean truly living, during this lifetime is to live an examined life. By that I mean living consciously with the humility to examine what's going on, how we're living, the choices we're making, and the unconscious drivers that may lead us down the wrong roads. A good method to deal with this, of course, is through psychotherapy. I am so grateful for my years that I have invested in examining my own life and for the benefits I've received from this service I also provide. One of my favorite stories of engaging therapy comes from a highly esteemed colleague, Lori Gottlieb. Lori is one of the most well-known therapists in the world today. She has a thriving psychotherapy practice in Los Angeles. She's a New York Times bestselling author with over 1 million copies of her book sold. Her TED Talk is magnificent and has millions of views. She writes a column in The Atlantic, and her podcast, Dear Therapists with Guy Winch, is top-notch. And like all of us, she is human. She has had her own existential crises during which she recognized she needed her own therapy, a process she deals extensively in her brilliant book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. This is a book that has received spectacular praise and is packed with wisdom, goodness, and it is so unputdownable that I have listened to its audio version twice. It provides profound psychological truths and, in captivating story form, shows the internal struggles we all experience when we are thinking about starting our own psychotherapy. To add layers of richness, Lori courageously describes her own process of being in psychotherapy and from the vantage point of a highly seasoned therapist. What gets in the way of us seeking our own therapy? What gets in the way of us asking for what we want? What are some of the pain points as we grow, even as we attain some of the results we have been seeking? These and so many other questions are answered in this captivating interview. So listen in as Lori and I discuss that nagging feeling of maybe you should talk to someone. Lori Gottlieb, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Oh, I'm such a fan of your work, and I've listened to your book twice, and each time I'm hit by what a great therapist you are and what a great bridge you are between the world of therapy to people who may consume it and may be a little bit scared just in terms of your ability to midwife very gently, lovingly, compassionately, and actually in a fashion of a role model, showing the courage that it requires to enter the therapy room through your own process of being a client. I can't thank you enough. The wisdom on every page, just like it sparkles. So thank you for that, first off.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. It was so important for me to show what it's like to go through the process of therapy from the other side, from being the person who comes in and says, I'm struggling and I need someone to help guide me. So, and maybe you should talk to someone. I have 4 patients that we follow through what they're going through. And then there's a 5th patient in the book. And the 5th patient is me as I go to my own therapist as I'm going through something. And at the very beginning of the book, one of the first things I say is that I really did not want to present myself as the expert up on high. I say that my most significant credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. And I think that this book is less about therapy, even though that's where it takes place, and more about our shared humanity.
And you and I both share a love for Irvin Yalom, who you've interviewed and by whom you've also been influenced, as I have. Probably my number one influence if I think about like the people who've shaped me as a therapist. And you refer to all of us as fellow travelers as he does. And I love that word. The word choice is so important as far as I'm concerned. I was wondering if you could share what you mean when you call us fellow travelers.
Sure. I love the phrase fellow travelers. And that again is Irving Yalom's phrase. And it's really because we are all on the same journey, even if our journeys look a little bit different. At our core, we are all so similar. And that's why when you look at the people that you're reading about in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, they seem so different on the surface in terms of their presentation, what their issue that they're dealing with is. Their personalities are starkly different, age, gender, socioeconomic background, you name it, very different. But you realize that everybody's kind of struggling with the same existential issues of what it means to be human. And so we are all fellow travelers in that sense. And I think so many times we think of ourselves as different from other people, or people are different from us. And I think as a therapist, you can't be a therapist and not realize how similar we all are. Every person who walks through my door shares similarities with one another and with me, no matter how different our lives look.
I couldn't agree more. And I believe that's where the healing occurs, in that beautiful kind of, to borrow from Martin Buber, that I and thou space, the recognition of our shared humanity and the fact that we're both kind of trying to rock the dash between our birth and death dates. And that we're all feeling that imperative, the urgency, the anxiety associated with the knowledge that we are here. We have certain choices, certain things don't appear to be choices. And of course, sometimes the therapist can disabuse the client and say, actually, there are choices where you didn't believe there were. And to be witnessed, and how primal that need is for all of us fellow travelers.
Yeah, I really think the role of a therapist is to be a witness and a guide, and to do both of those at the same time. And I like what you were talking about with this idea of choice, because people come in with a story. And I feel like my job is to help people edit their stories. And I have a writing background. So of course I was a writer long before I was a therapist. I'm still a writer. And in a way, I use so much of my editing skills to help people when they come in with a faulty narrative, and to say, wait a minute, let's examine that. Where did that story come from? What's the meaning of that story? How do you make meaning of the events that have happened to you? How do you see the next chapters? How do you see the chapter that you're in? Where are you getting these ideas? And can we kind of look at them and see what needs an edit? And so I think that's a really transformational process, to be able to say these ideas that I have that are fixed might not have to be fixed. So many people come in and they're very sure that the story that they're telling is the accurate version of the story. And it's accurate in one sense. It's accurate that from their perspective, it is the accurate version of the story. But if they can open up their perspective, if they can look through a different lens, they might see that there are many different ways to view that story.
And that is such a great example of why therapy is so helpful. And you describe us all as narrators of our own story, and sometimes actually faulty narrators. Possibly the last person we should listen to about our story is ourselves. And that having that sacred relationship with the therapist in front of whom we can be our most vulnerable, we have the opportunity to have that story, that narration, readdressed.
Right. I like to say that we're all unreliable narrators. And again, that doesn't mean that we're purposely misleading. It means that our version of the story can often be unreliable. And I think about that. There's a section in the book where I write about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. So idiot compassion is what our friends do for us. They back up the unreliable narrative that we give them. So your friend comes to you and says, oh my gosh, look at what my partner, my boss, my sister, my mother, whatever did, said. And your friend says, they're terrible. You're right. They're wrong. How dare they? So your friend, under the guise of being supportive, just goes along with your version of the story. That's idiot compassion. Yes, it's a form of compassion, but it's not necessarily that helpful, because sometimes if you listen to your friend over time, they're telling the same kind of story about lots of different people. So it's like, well, maybe the reason that men keep breaking up with you is that going through their things is not a good idea, right? Like whatever it is. But it's like, there might be some, it's kind of like if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, maybe it's you.
Totally.
We do not say that to our friends in Idiot Compassion. We say, yeah, oh, that's terrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. When you go to a therapist, what you will get is you will get wise compassion. And wise compassion is when we hold up a mirror to you and we help you to see something about yourself that maybe you haven't been willing or able to see. What is your role in what is happening? Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't difficult people out there. There's another line from the book about, before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes.
I was going to say that exact line. It's one of my all-time favorite lines.
It's so true, right? And so we have to remember that there are difficult people, there are difficult circumstances, there are difficult systems in the world that we are dealing with. I mean, we've been talking about them finally in the last few years, and there's so much more to talk about there. And we're finally bringing that into the therapy room instead of just saying, let's look at you as an individual. We're saying, let's look at you in the system in which we live. So yes, there are all those difficulties, but then what is our response? So how do we respond to that difficult person, that difficult situation? And I think that that's where the agency comes in. That's where the shift comes. That's where we start to take ownership of our lives, is when we can say, I have a role. I am actually the protagonist. And when I shift from being the supporting player to the protagonist, and when I stop making everybody else the villain, right? So it's not like, when there's more nuance, that sometimes I am the villain. Sometimes I am my own worst enemy.
Definitely.
When we can start to see ourselves in different roles, then we can start to write a story that's more cohesive and that gives us more power and that gives us more peace.
As you were talking, I found myself unwittingly formulating a comparison between friends and therapists. Both of them are so important in our lives. I'm a huge proponent of friendship, as you well know. I actually gave a TEDx talk on friendship in adulthood. So I really do care about friendship. And yet it's different from the relationship that we will have with the therapist. The therapist has training. The therapist has only one agenda. Friends may not have training, and certainly they may not have only one agenda. And I see friends almost now, as you're talking, versus the therapist, as two forms of nourishment or replenishment, perhaps one being water, one being calories, but each of them having their very important role in our survival. But one alone will not necessarily, and I'm not saying that everybody needs therapy, but I do believe that there are many people who would benefit from it who are not currently seeking it out. And one of the great gifts that you give everybody on both sides of therapy, whether they provide or they receive or both, like you and I do, is you act as an iconoclast, breaking down formerly held idols of what therapy is and what it's not, and who a therapist might be and who they are not, by being so revealing. What are some of the common myths that people have about therapy, and what might you say to correct those myths?
Well, I think you're right. I think one of the reasons that people don't go to therapy is because they have a lot of misconceptions about what it actually is. And I should say, before I talk about what therapy is and isn't, I think that friends are hugely important. I always say that we grow in connection with others. And so friends are very important. But I think that if you are surrounded by people that you trust, then friends can be just as valuable as a therapist. I always say to people, choose your audience well. Meaning, if you're going to be vulnerable with somebody, if you're going to open up, if you're going to reveal yourself, choose your audience well. A lot of people have had the unfortunate experience of saying, well, I've been vulnerable and that hasn't worked out so well. And that's probably because you didn't choose your audience well. And that might be because when you were young, you didn't have the choice of an audience, and that audience wasn't modeling something for you that you could get modeled for you as an adult in a different way. So I think that in terms of what therapy is and what it isn't, a lot of people think that you go to therapy, you download the problem of the week, you leave, you come back the next week, you download the problem of the week, you leave. And it's like someone to talk to. No, it's not. That would be a huge waste of your time and money. Therapy is a very active process, and most of it, and this is what people don't realize, takes place outside the therapy room. I like to say that insight is the booby prize of therapy. You can have all the insight in the world, But if you don't make changes out in the world between sessions, the insight is useless. You can come into therapy and say, oh, that's why I do that thing with my partner. And then I'll say to them, well, did you do something different? Oh, no, I didn't, but I know why I do it now. Okay, that's a first step, but you have to change. You have to make changes. So what therapy really is it's a way to try to understand more about your patterns, the ways that you engage in relationship with yourself, with others, the ways that you self-sabotage, the ways that you hold yourself back, getting clear about what are fears and what are risks and all the kinds of things, what your desires are that maybe people in the past have not approved of. And so you've pushed down those desires. It's really a way to get clarity. And when you have clarity, you now have choices and you now get to do things differently. So I think it's really important that people understand that what we're doing in therapy is setting you up to do things differently during the week between sessions. And our goal is for you to not be in therapy in most cases. So what it is it's not other people. Another myth about therapy is you're going to go to therapy, you're going to talk about your childhood ad nauseum, and you're never going to leave. And that's what therapy looks like. Right. And in fact, it's first of all, it's a very active process. Nobody wants to go in and talk to a brick wall. Nobody wants to go in and talk to someone who says, oh, that must have been so hard. Oh, I'm so sorry. Your friends will do that for you. So that's not what you're coming to therapy for. We're here to ask the questions that you need to be asking yourself. We want to ask you just the right question at just the right time. It's like timing and dosage. It's very strategic. It might look like we're just having a conversation with you, but I played competitive chess when I was younger, and I use that all the time in the therapy room. If I make this move, they might make that move, or I'm 5 moves ahead because I need to know that if I make that move now, this person's defenses are going to go up and we're going to get nowhere and we're going to be set back. So I need to really think I might be dying to say something in that moment, but I know I'm 3 sessions away from saying that. So you have to be really, really aware of where that person is internally and what they're ready for and what they're not. And can you stretch them just a little bit every single session? Can you say one thing that sounds like a statement, but is really a question that just floating there and that they're not really going to respond to maybe in the room, but that's going to sit with them all week. And they're going to come back 2 weeks later and say, hey, I had this idea. They're going to think it was their idea. They're going to have it. They're
totally.
Have
and not attribute it to the work at all.
Right. Which is great because we want that to be from them. We want them to take ownership of the changes. So it's a very active process. It's not like you're just coming in and you're having a conversation and you're talking about your problems. In fact, a lot of what we talk about is people's joy. People forget about that too, that people are so afraid of their joy. They think, well, I'm coming to therapy, so I need to talk about what's not working. And yet you find that these are people who they don't really sit with their joy. They don't really embrace their joy. In fact, they have cherophobia, which is they're afraid of joy because they're always afraid to celebrate the good or to even sit with the good. Because if I acknowledge what I have, it'll all go away.
Right.
The other shoe is going to drop. It never
Absolutely.
lasts.
Absolutely.
So we want both in the therapy room. And I think the other thing that is so amazing about the experience of sitting in a room with another person face to face with no phones, no distractions, just 2 humans trying to connect and understand is that you will never have that experience in the exact same way because we don't exist in your life outside. So this is a very unique relationship. And I don't think there's really anything else like it. And what we're doing is we're preparing you to have that kind of deep relationship with other people outside of the room.
Such a great point. And since all of us share in common 168 hours in the week, and if we meet weekly, there's 167 hours to practice outside of the therapy room. And one of the things that you have so beautifully identified is that therapy is a place for naming the unnameable, whether it's in the wording of the client in a way that they've never seen it before, imposing a new meaning, since we are homo symbolicus, not just homo sapiens. We are influenced by meaning and we are meaning-driven creatures. Or if we are basically going to be able to name something like cherophobia. Oh my gosh, so that's a thing. I remember hearing Brene Brown describing flying to Oprah for the very first time, absolutely certain as she's hugging her husband, it would be the last time, because of course the plane would go down if so much good was happening. And it's almost like we're afraid to acknowledge the good. And I'm so grateful to psychologists and therapists who are beginning to recognize, wait, we need to also acknowledge the good. Otherwise it's half baked as well.
And I think this idea of naming your experience feels like such a relief, because first of all, so many people think that their experience is unique to them. And when there's a name for it, then you realize, oh, other people have this experience too. It's not just me. And so all of a sudden you feel like this isn't just some weirdness, some shameful weirdness that I have. And then naming it also gives you a frame through which to view it. So my very first therapy client, and I say this when I was an intern. So I was actually a trainee. So I wasn't even an intern yet. I was a trainee. I was still in grad school. And they put you in a room with a patient and you are supposed to do an intake. I thought, by the way, as somebody who came from journalism, I thought, oh, this is going to be really easy because I do interviews all the time. I've been doing them for a very long time. I'm very good at them. I feel very comfortable with them. How hard can it be to get the information that I need on this form from this person? Well, it was very, very difficult. I write about this in the book.
I love that.
This woman comes in and within seconds, she tells me she's having such a hard time. She's a young woman. She's having such a hard time. And then she starts crying. And she is crying. I don't mean like she's shedding a few tears. I mean, she is hysterically crying seconds into the session. And I don't know basic things like, do I look at her so that she knows I'm with her? Do I not look at her so that she doesn't feel uncomfortable as she's crying? Do I say something to get her to stop crying, or is that my discomfort? Yes, it was my discomfort.
Right.
But when we talk about naming something, she's crying. She's telling me all this stuff. And then I say what I think is literally the most moronic thing that has ever been said in the history of psychotherapy. I say to her, well, it sounds like you're depressed. And the minute I say that, I think, oh my God, I'm in the wrong profession. I never should have done this. This is really hard. I'm going to have to tell my supervisor what happened, because obviously she's depressed. And she stops crying and she looks up at me and she almost smiles. And she says, yes, I'm depressed. And nobody has said that yet. And she was so relieved because her boyfriend, her parents, her friends, her sister, nobody has put a name to her experience. And she felt so connected and so less alone. Suddenly she wasn't alone in the world. It was like somebody sees me. And I think that's what we all ultimately want in life. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you understand me? And once that happens, it sets the stage for so much else to change. But if you don't have that, nothing's going to change. So I think just naming the experience can feel like such a relief to people.
Huge. And as you're describing the idea of, I understand you, that concept, that importance, that primal need that we have to be understood, that oftentimes I'll work with couples and they love each other immensely, but they don't understand each other because, you so good.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, I was going to say, I remember, so I see a lot of couples and I saw this couple and the woman said to her husband, you know what 3 words I really want to hear more? And he said, I love you. And she said, no, I understand you. Mm. And it was this pivotal moment for me as a therapist too. Just this idea that so many people say, oh, I want to feel loved. I want to feel loved. How do we feel loved? We feel loved when someone takes the time to understand us, when they put in the effort to say, I know I'm feeling this way, but I wonder how my partner feels.
Right.
My experience might be different, and I'm going to allow for the space between us because it will connect us if I allow for that space. It's paradoxical. People think, oh, we have to experience something in the same way. No, we have to allow for the other person to experience something in a different way, and that will bring us closer.
And as you were saying that, I was imagining each person in the couple so full of anxiety of loss that they're squeezing each other too hard, not allowing for there to be space so that the other person can really share, this is me, and that there's room for me. And I think all of us have some experience in which we imagine, oh my gosh, I'm too much, or if they really know me, they will leave me. And how important it is to know that we can be known and still loved.
So many people will say, especially in couples, I'm afraid if I bring this up, it will break the relationship.
Totally.
And I always say, if you don't bring it up, that's what will break the relationship.
Right.
The unspoken is what breaks the relationship. The spoken is what gives the relationship its air.
That is such a big deal. And for the flame, the sacred flame, the eternal flame, so to speak, of the relationship to carry on, there needs to be oxygen.
Yes.
It has to breathe. It's paradoxical, and it's not how we are oriented. It's almost akin to what we learn in driving school of turn into the curve as the car is spinning out.
Yes. Yes. Well, you see that with John, and maybe you should talk to someone where there's this, I won't spoil it, but there's this huge experience that his family had gone through. And it was really creating this divide between him and his wife. And they were experiencing a tragedy very differently. And he said, she cries all the time about this. And if I break down, then, I have to be the strong one. I have to be the rock. I have to hold this up. And I said, I don't think you're holding anyone up by holding in your pain. And once he started talking to her about his pain was when everybody could breathe again and they were able to find their way back to each other.
And I believe you even so brilliantly said, they are holding your pain.
Yes, that the reason that your wife is crying all the time is because she's crying for both of you.
Exactly. And I thought that was just so on point. And that's one of the gifts of therapy where that can be said. Again, I think the training comes into play. It's the hours that you've had behind the wheel that allowed you to utter that brilliant phrase just when it was needed. And that can only be the byproduct of hours and hours of evaluating your own work, perhaps engaging in consultation, perpetually trying to up your game, but also noticing how do I best serve my clients and keeping that as an open-ended question all the time as a therapist, as a provider.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think time behind the wheel matters, but I also think living your life matters. That the more experience you have out in the world, and I don't mean number of years lived, I mean consciously examining how you're living your life and living your life with intention.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I remember when I was writing the list before choosing my mate for life, my wife, at the top of the list was psychological intelligence. And to me, what that meant is someone who has lived life and someone who has examined that life to date and had the humility to do so. And I think that's one of the things that we're kind of trained not to do, to have swagger, to look like we have confidence. You and I grew up in an era where self-esteem was the very misguided target for all things. And as it turns out, kind of more like Carol Dweck describes, we all need to be willing to suck and have a growth mindset and be willing to examine, okay, how did that faceplant happen? And I really resonated with your experience with boyfriend, as he's known in the book. And you really examined the relationship and really took back the narrative to a large degree and said, yes, this is my story and this is how I want to live it. Can you describe a little bit what got you into therapy yourself during that phase of your life and what it gave you?
Yeah. So the book opens with a breakup. And the book is not about a breakup at all. In fact, you see that is not the reason I'm in therapy, despite my thinking it is. and in the very first session, my therapist says that to me. So as I begin the narrative, I was going to marry this man. He had children. I had an 8-year-old at the time. And he tells me one night out of the blue that he has decided that he can't live with a kid under his roof for the next 10 years. And this comes as a complete shock to me. And I'm going to put that in quotes because as we see in therapy, it's actually not a complete shock, but I thought it was at the time. And so I end up going to therapy and all of my friends are doing the idiot compassion. He's a jerk. He's terrible. How could he do this? Not just to you, but to your kid, the whole thing.
Totally.
And I'm the innocent injured one in this scenario. And the first thing that happens is in my very first therapy session with the therapist I call Wendell, I'm telling him, and I wasted all these years with him and half my life is over. And Wendell stops right there and he says, this half my life is over. He said, I think you're grieving more than this boyfriend. And really what I'm in therapy for is this much deeper grief that I have not explored at all, that I'm not even really aware of. And as I go through the therapy, I learned too that I had a role in this. And there were lots of clues that my boyfriend was not a kid person. And I willfully ignored them for all kinds of reasons related to half my life is over. And so it was a very illuminating process. And I think that's what therapy does with us is we come in with one story and we leave with another. We come in with one presenting problem and we find out that really it was about something related but deeper and something that's going to help us grow in a much broader way. So I think that it's funny because I think if I heard, oh, it's a book about a breakup, I would be like, I'm not interested in that
Totally.
book. But it's not about that at all. And you can see with every single person, the other four people whose stories I follow, it seems like it's about that one thing that they come in with, but it ends up being about so much more.
Yeah. And one of the things that therapy can do is act as something of an insurance policy that we're actually living our life while we're alive. And had you gone through life with this kind of theme song of it was him, I had nothing to do with it, whatever, that would have been the way many people cope after a breakup, but you never would have been able to view it in a cognitively flexible manner and say, I wonder, what does this actually really mean about me and my life moving forward? And that was one of the great gifts of Wendell from where I sat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said about this idea of the finitude of life, that we're living on borrowed time. And we need to have that awareness. And I don't mean in a perseverative way or in an obsessive way, but I think it really helps us to focus. You know, in my TED Talk, I tell people in my TED Talk that one of the things I have said to people when we talk about rewriting our stories is we're all going to die and life has 100% mortality rate. And that's not just for other people. That's for all of us. It's for us. It's for the people we love. It's for every single one of us, 100% mortality rate. And if we can look at our days like that, I think that when we wake up in the morning, we will be more focused about our priorities, about what's important and also what's not. And I think COVID did that a little bit for us. I think for many of us, we started to say, oh, I need to look at my priorities. I need to look at the way that I'm living my life. And here's some changes I can make. And a lot of people made changes that they're keeping as a result of having had that wake up call. But it shouldn't take a global pandemic for us to be aware of the fact that we do have a limited time here, that the people we love do also, and that we need to make choices that are consistent with our goals and our values, and that we are aligned internally. And that's where you get this sense of peace.
So true. And it's always later than we think. And we also live under this exceptionalism myth that we will not die and that the rules somehow don't apply to us until life has a way of sharing with us. By the way, actually, you're not an exception in a host of ways, up to and including the big one, which is death. And as you render that profundity about the finitude and us being aware of it, I think about how much of life is spent doing things that don't matter. And it's almost like we're waiting for like the Friday before we take a vacation on Saturday to deal with everything in our inbox. And we don't kind of live with that urgency as we live. I'm not suggesting that everybody run around like chickens with their heads cut off, but I am suggesting that time matters. And how we use that one non-renewable resource matters. And that's one of the things that living existentially, as you're describing, can really help us do, is to see what matters and maybe what doesn't that we thought mattered.
Yeah, there's that chapter in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone called The Speed of Want. And it was about how we were all rushing through our internships and rushing for the next thing. And we couldn't wait to get to the next level. And one of our supervisors walked into the break room. We were all sitting there doing our notes and trying to just rush through everything. And someone had said, like, I'm going to be 40 before this happens. And she said, you're going to be 40 whether or not it happens. Like, what does it matter? Where are these artificial milestones, these artificial deadlines that you give yourself? Live your life the way you want to live your life. you're still going to turn that age, God willing. And I think about Julie in the book. So Julie was this young woman who, on her honeymoon, she was in her early 30s. And on her honeymoon, she discovered something in her breast and went to a doctor. It turned out she had breast cancer. And later it turns out to be she has terminal cancer. And she asked me if I will be with her until she dies. And at one point thinks about, what do I want to do with the time that I have left? And they said, well, it could be a year, it could be 10 years. And of course, the difference between a year and 10 years is enormous. So how do you think about that? How do you plan when everybody else is making plans, especially at that time in life, about family planning and career planning and all the things that people plan? And we talked about this concept of a bucket list, which we really did not like, because it was this idea. She said, I don't want to make a list of all of these things that, well, you check them off, you check them off, you check them off. She said, I just want to live every day in a way that feels meaningful, in a way that feels fulfilling. And so she made a very unusual choice about what she wanted to do with her life.
Yeah.
And I won't reveal it in case people have not read the book. But I think it makes us all think a lot about, it's not about, well, I'm going to travel the world, or I'm going to bungee jump, or I'm going to, whatever I'm going to do.
Right.
Like I'm going to skydive. It's like, what are you going to do in those moments? How are you going to make them meaningful to you? And by the way, it wasn't like all of a sudden when I say meaningful, she was like, people are telling me I shouldn't waste time on Twitter. She's like, I like Twitter. I want to be on Twitter, right? She was just very balanced about, here are the things that I want to do. These are the kinds of things that I want to spend my time on. And I'm just being intentional about, I like Twitter. I'm going to do it. I don't care what other people think. And then also, I'm going to do this other thing that maybe isn't the thing that people think is the right thing for me to do. I should do things that are amazing, but those aren't the things that mean something to me. And then you look in the book at someone who's older, like Rita, who is about to turn 70, and she's lived her life in a way that she has deep regret about the ways in which she has lived her life. And she's utterly alone. Her adult children are estranged from her. She's had some marriages that didn't work. And she feels absolutely hopeless that anything could change. And what we see with Rita, and by the way, and I admit this in the book, I'm very, very forthcoming about what I'm thinking and feeling, because I really wanted to show my own humanity in the book. And I say in the book that I wondered too, like her life was so empty and it was so unpeopled. I always look at a first session, how is someone's life peopled? Who are the people in their lives? Do they have any kind of meaningful relationship with anyone? And she did not. She was like a hermit. And yet she had made so many mistakes, and she had also suffered so much in so many ways. And she had never had anybody to do what we did with her in therapy. But I did not know that things would go the way that they went. I thought, well, let's help her connect in the world. I had very modest hopes. And I was ashamed of that later, because when I saw what she actually did, and I think her story is so inspiring and also not that unusual. Totally. And I think we need to remember that it ain't over till it's over. Yep. And she profoundly changed her life. So when we think about finitude, yes, she didn't have as much time as, say, Charlotte, the woman in the book, who's in her 20s and making all these dating mistakes, but she still had the ability to change the time that she had left. And I think that's something we all need to remember. So many people say, oh, it's too late for that. Like, we have these desires, we have these dreams, and people say, it's too late. And I would say, read a story, and maybe you should talk to someone and then think about whether it's really too late.
And I would corroborate that. Read a story, read the whole book. I've only read it twice, as I mentioned, and I loved it both times. And I found it made me a better therapist each time. So really, just so many ways to appreciate this book. One of the things that you also do so well, both in the media and in your book, is you address some of the roadblocks people experience when they're considering going to therapy, including minimizing their pain, saying I should be able to handle it on my own. Well, it's not like Julie. That's not like cancer. I don't have cancer, at least. And minimizing their pain. And you very wisely, I've heard you say, you would still go to the hospital with a broken arm and get that treated, even if it's not as bad as what's going on in the oncology ward. So why do we wait so long for our hearts to be severely ruptured before we even make that call the very first time? To kind of borrow from John Gottman, I believe he said that on average, when we have a cardiac event, we'll call the EMTs within 30 minutes. When it's an affair of the heart relating to love, it may be many years and many years too late at times. What are your
That's-
thoughts about the kind of barriers to entry, as well as maybe how a person might overcome those?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So we have this distinction that we make between our physical health and our emotional health. And by the way, there isn't actually this distinction because our health is our health.
Yeah.
But what we do is we put it in buckets. So just like you said, if you are feeling some discomfort in your chest, you will probably go to a cardiologist quite quickly. You're not just going to sit there, for weeks and months and years and say, oh, I have this. And then you have a heart attack. What people do with their emotional health is they say, yeah, I'm feeling kind of sad, or I'm having trouble in relationships, or I'm feeling anxious, or I don't know, something just feels off. But it's not that bad compared to, and then everybody has their own rubric. They compare it to something in their own minds that seems worse. So I don't really need to go to therapy, or I have a roof over my head and food on the table, and I have great friends and a great family and a great partner. So I shouldn't be feeling this way. I have no reason to feel this way. Right. So they kind of talk themselves out of their feelings. And then what happens is they don't come to therapy until they're having the equivalent of an emotional heart attack. And the problem with waiting so long is that, first of all, you've suffered unnecessarily for a long period of time. And secondly, it's harder to work with. It's harder to treat because now you're in a different place. Now it's gotten so bad that we have to get you back to baseline and then deal with what we would have dealt with if you would just come in when you first asked yourself, oh, maybe I should see someone. But nah, it's not that bad. And by the way, I think I always say to people, if you're asking yourself if you should go see a therapist, that is your inner therapist telling you that you need to go see a therapist.
Almost worthy of repeating. If you hear yourself asking, maybe you should see someone. Yeah, you should. And it's a wise part of you that's beckoning you.
Because other voices are drowning out your inner voice, your inner knowing. We all have a place of inner knowing. And so often we get talked out of it by all the noise out there. So I think it's really important for people to understand that there's not something wrong with you if you go to therapy, just like there's not something wrong with you if you have chest pain and you're going to see a cardiologist. There is something that is not working well with your health, and you need to take care of your health. And the same thing, by the way, preventatively, we go and we get a checkup every year to make sure that everything's working well in our bodies. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't really know why I want to go see a therapist, but I just feel like I want to talk to someone about how my life is going and maybe hear it reflected back to me and have a space to talk about some things that maybe I don't even know I need to talk about yet. I just want to go in and just see how I'm doing. And I like to say that therapy is like getting a really good second opinion on your life from someone who isn't already in your life.
Great. It's interesting hearing you say that, because I remember in my 20s when I was falling in love with the process of getting more control over my life through therapy. I was in my 20s and I remember thinking, okay, I've addressed most of what I need. And yet I pressed on with my weekly sessions, realizing that it was roughly for me a psychic workout, and it was acting preventively and helping me ask myself, and what do I want more of in my life? What do I want less of? How can I be more conscious as I navigate through this thing, to borrow from Prince, called life? And it's been huge. One of the ways that you've come up with so brilliantly, and I'm so thrilled, is with a workbook that acts as a companion piece to your, here I am showing it to you as if you don't know what it looks like. But, it's so great. I wanted to spend a little time about how you came up with some really good activities. I decided to just choose a random page earlier today. And of course, it was the precursor to any form of courage. And it was page 66, practicing vulnerability. You so brilliantly break it down. You reference the book that you've written as well as the characters within it. And then you come up with real world ways for a person to create a good audience member, just like you were talking about earlier, like who is the audience in front of whom I can share X, Y, and Z, and coming up with the discernment to actually ask oneself and introspect who is safe, who is not, in front of whom can I be courageous, in front of whom might be reckless, which would be not courageous. Can you talk about the book a little bit, and as well as how a person might benefit from using it, whether they're a therapist or someone in therapy?
Yeah. So the workbook is a companion to the book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. So this is called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, the workbook. And it's a tool for editing your story and changing your life. It's a step-by-step guide. So many people after reading Maybe You Should Talk to Someone said, I highlighted, I underlined, I have quotes over my desk, over my bathroom mirror, everywhere. But I wish that I could be in therapy with you. And I thought, you know what? One of the things I really wanted to do I have a podcast called Dear Therapist, where
fabulous,
we
by the
sessions
way.
with people, we give them advice. They have a week to try it out. They come back. So you could hear how a session can help somebody shift in just one session. So everything that I do, whether it's the TED Talk or the podcast or the book or the workbook, I want to make this process accessible to people, because for so many people, it's not, whether it's financially not accessible, whether it is logistically not accessible, whether they just aren't ready to go and be vulnerable in front of somebody, or they don't, or culturally, it's not what they do. And so there's a big barrier there. I just wanted anybody to be able to have access to these ideas, these tools, and this process. And so everybody said, oh, please write a workbook for Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Help us take all the ideas from the book and put them in one place. And I thought, I don't really want that sort of bullet pointed, let me just go through chapter by chapter. Maybe you should talk to someone. Like, I would want them to have an experience, not just go through a workbook, but to have a real emotional experience with themselves and to really have the experience of what you would have if you went into a therapy room. And so it wasn't until I did my TED Talk, which was about how changing our stories can change our lives, that I realized that's the workbook. That's the frame of the workbook. And so what I do is I go step by step and help people to examine their stories and rewrite them in this guided way. And when you talk about that one chapter, I think what it does is not only help you to understand how to create more emotional freedom in your relationships, but it teaches you also how to be a good listener, not just how to do this with someone, but how to receive when someone does this with you. And I think that we don't really learn how to listen in our culture. So for example, someone will come to you and they'll come to you with something, and you usually, I will say we people usually respond in a way that we would want to be responded to. So if someone comes to you and you say, oh, well, let me tell you, if you like someone to give you advice, you're going to give them advice. If you want someone to, however you like to be treated in those situations, you're going to try to do for the other person. We rarely stop to think, what do they need right now? We don't even ask them. So what I think is really important, and this isn't any relationship, whether it's, a romantic relationship, a couple's relationship, a friendship, a family relationship, your kids, anything, is to be able to say, how can I be helpful right now? I'm here for you. Just saying, I am here and I am present, and you tell me how I can be helpful. And the person might say, I just need a hug. And you might be thinking, oh, but I so want to give them advice on this. But they said, I just want a hug. So you give them the hug because they're not going to use your advice right now. And in fact, they will probably reject it because that's not what they're wanting. And things don't have to happen in one conversation. So when someone comes to you with something, they might in that moment need a hug. And then 2 days later, they might be like, hey, can we talk about that again? I'm wondering what you think. So people forget that it doesn't have to happen in that micro moment. So sometimes people will say, I just need a hug. Or sometimes people will say, like, I want to hear how you think about this. Or sometimes they might say, what I really need right now is to sit down and watch a show with you. And so it might be something very different from what you would want. Or they might say, I need you to help me craft an email. That's what I need. But then ultimately, I'm going to decide what I want to do. But I'm curious to hear what it would sound like if you did this. And it just makes it so much easier to be able to go to someone and feel like you're actually getting the support that you need. Because when someone comes to you, they want support, but you might define support differently. And I will say we do this with our kids too, because we feel discomfort. So our kids come to us and they'll say something like, oh my gosh, I'm really sad. This thing happened today at lunch and so didn't sit with me. And our thing is like, well, you should talk to her. You should go sit here. Here's what you should do. Or sometimes we don't even give our kids the space to feel what they're feeling. They're like, I'm so sad, or I'm so worried about this test tomorrow. And we're like, hey, look over here. Let's go get frozen yogurt. Or hey, let's go to Disneyland. let's forget about the fact that you're feeling anything that makes me uncomfortable that you're feeling it. Because as a parent, I can't tolerate your anxiety, your sadness, your anger. I can't tolerate it. I feel helpless around it. So I'm going to cheer you up.
And
That's my
basically,
job
I'm
as a
handing
parent.
my child in that moment my poor coping, so that becomes their poor coping over time. They may engage in retail therapy or hedonism or substance abuse when problems come up, rather than say, I'll sit with it.
I think the 3 words that are most helpful are tell me more.
Totally.
All you have to say is, oh, tell me more. And your kid is so intuitive. Like, you have to trust your kid. And by the way, if they want your advice, they will ask for it. But before you give it, ask them to tell you more. Like, you can say, I'll tell you what I think about this, but first tell me more. And they might say, well, this happened. And you say, yeah, okay. And then they'll keep talking. Tell me more. And then this and this, and maybe I could do this. And oh, and maybe I said this thing that maybe I shouldn't have, and then they'll go through a whole thing and they pretty much solve their problem. Or they might still feel rejected by it, but they feel your presence. And you don't have to get the friend to do the thing that they want the friend to do, or you don't have to get the teacher to do the thing they want. Now, this is different from bullying, or this is different from like a serious situation. But I'm talking about in the day-to-day, that if you teach your child that they can sit with their anxiety or their sadness or the feeling of disappointment or the feeling of rejection, and they won't die from it, and actually they're going to be okay with it, that is the best preparation for adulthood you can give them. I can go to someone, I'm not alone in it, and I can tolerate the discomfort.
Yes.
You learn that when you're listening to your partner and when you're listening to yourself also.
Such a good point that you learn it when you're listening to your partner as well as yourself. And I think about a variety of things, including the concept of timing and dosage, and how you so brilliantly have identified those 2 keys, as I see it, really the pillars of empathy. You really have to enter another person's world in order to recognize what the timing is and what the dosage might look like. And we have to override our brain, which is oriented solely for our survival. It's not oriented to dial into another person's experience all of the time in the way that we're talking about. And by the way, when I said we need to be able to sit with it, I meant earlier that we need to be able to sit with it and explore it with the other person in an empathic way. And as you're speaking, I think about how misguided certain good and well-intended ideas like the golden rule are: treat others as you'd want to be treated. You might not want a hug, but the other person might. And the platinum rule, getting to know what the other person really wants through empathic questioning, asking how you can be helpful, asking, tell me more, these types of things, saying there's space for you to be known here in this relationship. Wow.
Right.
What a big deal.
It's interesting because there are 2 things going on. One is, I'm here with you. You are not alone. And I acknowledge that you're a separate person from me. Those 2 things have to be there. You are not alone. I am fully present and fully here for you. And you are your own person. So you can have different thoughts, different feelings, different ideas about things than I do. And I will still be 100% present for you. So we are not merged, but we are together. And that, if you can do that for your kids, wow. Because what happens is if you don't do that for your kids, later I see them in therapy, or I don't see them in therapy and they're just living their lives, but they tend to numb out their feelings. So they don't know what to do with their feelings. They don't even know what they feel because they're so confused about the difference between what they feel and what somebody else might feel. And so they can't tell the difference. So what they do is when they have a feeling, they think, oh, I don't want to have that feeling, discomfort. I don't want discomfort. So I'm going to numb it out with like too much food or too much alcohol or doom scrolling or just the mindless scrolling through the internet or shopping online or drama. Drama is a form of
for sure.
Avoidance of anything. So I'll just create a lot of drama and then I don't really have to think about the underlying feelings that I'm having. But the misconception here is that numbness isn't the absence of feelings. Numbness is a sense of being overwhelmed by too many feelings. And that's why we self-medicate with food, alcohol, or things happen, insomnia, relationship difficulty. The feelings will come out. You can try to numb them, but they'll come out in all these other ways. And so if you give them air, like we were talking about earlier, that's when things could change. And so when we talk about what we're teaching our children, we really want to teach them that you can manage your discomfort. I am here. You are not alone. and you're going to grow from this experience.
Love that. I want to say that your ideas really correspond with the concept of we need to feel it to heal it. And that providing that loving, safe container that whether it's in the context of therapy or as parents or as friends, it's the biggest gift is to allow a person to breathe and to know themselves and to be known by us. And I just have loved getting to know you through your work and through this interview, through your TED Talk, through your fabulous podcast with Guy Winch. I just can't say enough good things about what you're doing during this dash called life. I'm so grateful to you for all you've provided, both the consumers as well as the providers of therapy. Lori, you're a gift.
Well, thank you so much. You know, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and it's really an honor to be able to have the conversation with you today.
Oh, thanks, Lori. Can't wait to hang out with you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.